Well, welcome to the County Seat. I'm Sean Milne, filling in for Chad Booth this week, and our topic today is broadband access in rural Utah. And for a quick primer on today's topic, we go to Beaver County.
For many Utahns, going online is like turning on a faucet. Whenever you want it, the internet is there and ready to take you anywhere you want to go. But for some rural Utahns, just getting the internet can be very difficult, much less high-speed internet.
Having smaller providers in a smaller rural area has somewhat been prohibitive to bring traditional broadband speeds into the community as a whole and offer it to all residents or businesses within the communities. The problem is demographics. Beaver County has approximately 6,700 residents. So what kind of profit margin are these larger companies going to realize if they bring out here, and lay fiber for 5 miles at the cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars a mile? What's the return on investment?
But in the information age we live in, having high-speed, reliable internet is as important as access to roads.
The internet is no longer a luxury. Now, I believe that the internet is a utility, such as electricity, water. It provides information and a pathway for people to do not only recreational activities such as watching movies or what have you, all the way up to actually running a business, owning a business, or working remotely from home, because the availability of true broadband speeds is sporadic.
In addition to making it impossible for rural residents to participate in telework, lack of broadband makes it harder for communities to attract new business.
So without high-speed internet, how can we support an industry of something of that nature? How are we going to entice business to start up in Beaver County without the provision of a utility of that nature?
The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the importance of internet as access to commerce, education, and medicine all moved online.
During the pandemic, whenever the schools were closed, a lot of the kids' households didn't have sufficient internet capability to do online schoolwork. So they drove to the high school, sat in the parking lot, or drove to the hospital, sat in the parking lot, got on the Wi-Fi just so they could do their schoolwork. We had some of our highest risk individuals in this county that were forced to make in-person doctor's visits in a hospital setting or a clinic setting because they cannot support at home the telehealth visit. And COVID shone a bright, huge spotlight on the deficiencies that existed.
With this new focus and funding, communities like Beaver County are looking at new innovative ways of providing high-speed internet to their community, beyond running wires to every home.
Infowest currently has over-the-air wireless internet capability, and they have towers. And they've recently completed a new tower with new technology that's going to broaden their footprint and their ability to service some areas outside of Beaver City limits. I've been working on a project with a computer engineering firm out of Missouri for over a year now, and we have designed a system that's based on wireless with towers, with microwave technology, and licensed radio frequencies to essentially build a canopy over the entirety of Beaver County. This has been my #1 priority for over a year. So, and it's been one of the toughest things I've ever done in my career. Utah is an entrepreneurial state. We always have been. We love economic drivers, and I think that the internet goes part and parcel with that.
Bringing every community in Utah online is an important factor in making sure that these areas thrive into the future. For the County Seat, I'm Derek Dowsett.
Thanks, Derek. When we come back, we'll discuss broadband in rural areas on a bit of a broader scale. You're watching the County Seat. Welcome back to the County Seat. I'm Sean Milne, filling in for Chad Booth. Today we're reviewing, as we heard before the commercial break, broadband access in rural Utah. And we're joined today by our two special guests. Rebecca Dilg is the director of the Utah Broadband Center in the newly rebranded Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, and Randy Cosby, the COO of Infowest, a broadband provider, primarily in southern and central Utah?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, welcome. So the Utah Broadband Center, that's a new initiative?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about it and what the mission is.
Well, the legislature, this last general session, after this, I think primarily after this year of COVID, saw the vision that there is a need for a center to be able to coordinate the efforts that are happening either through infrastructure or digital inclusion, and so they established the Utah Broadband Center. The coordination will in part be a plan, so it's going to always help to have a plan for the state of what we want to do. Along with this, and this is ongoing, we have a Broadband Advisory Council where we bring together the providers and state organizations, there's nonprofits, it's any community. We have local counties that come and participate, and we share efforts and share ideas and technologies related to broadband. So we also maintain a broadband broadband availability maps. So those are listed on our business.utah.gov/broadband website, and you can go there and you can click your address and you can see the providers and the speeds of broadband that are available at your location or that are not available at that location.
That's got to be a great tool for consumers.
Yes.
And so speaking of that, Randy, you represent one of those providers and specializing in southern and central Utah, mainly rural areas?
Rural, as well as places like St. George, Cedar City. I don't know if you consider that rural or not, but it's a wide variety of geographies, economic situations there. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges getting broadband because of geography, obviously. I mean, some of these places are just out in the middle of nowhere, in canyons, places like that. But I think economically there's some challenges as well. Just within a single city, you might have a more prosperous area where you've got fiber optics and everything else. Another area of town may not have as good of access, may not have the attention of the broadband providers, and we try to fill those needs on both sides.
Would that be comparable to your kind of a niche market as far as providing mainly or solely to rural areas? Is that what Infowest does?
A lot of what we do is, yeah. Right. We also participate with Utopia on their fiber network. We have a couple fiber networks of our own. So we do a number of different things. We've been in business 27 years. We've got quite a scope of things that we do.
Do you provide the backbone from major hubs, or are you tapping off of that broadband backbone to give service within a clustered area?
Both. Some places we've got our own backbones, whether it's microwave or fiber. Other places we're getting on, whether it's the telephone companies, fiber and leasing lines, or Utopia, places like that. So we do a little bit of whatever's needed. There's not a cookie cutter solution that works with a variety of different challenges that we face.
And I imagine that that's what you're helping to coordinate within the Utah Broadband Center as well, is the fact that not all communities have equal access for sure, but they don't have a mirror of the same challenges?
In part. So the providers, we do rely on them a lot. They are really the experts when it comes to what they know about the technology and the terrain. And there is a challenge in these rural areas because of the distance between households. So the coordination sometimes it's getting a phone call or an email or a message from a resident. For instance, this last year, I had a couple of families that contacted me and said, hey, our children can't go to school. We're having to drive miles and miles, have them sit outside to get public Wi-Fi, and we need a tower. Is there some way we can get some help here? So reaching out to the providers, helping connect them with somebody that is within the location and finding a solution for them. That's one thing that we're able to do. I might add, this year though, along with this Utah Broadband Center, the state funded a broadband access grant. So we will be able to provide additional funds to help support the providers as they're getting help getting access, broadband access to rural and unserved and underserved areas.
Obviously last year was extra special the world over, and no doubt for this kind of utility. And the fact that so many school districts obviously were schooling remotely, as well as parents and employers working remotely. How did you internally keep track of probably incoming calls like this, whether through a state agency or consumers directly that said, hey, I really have to have this? What were some of the challenges that you faced in order to quickly gear up or serve clients that otherwise hadn't needed to think about it before?
Yeah, I don't know about the keeping track of things so much, so we could geographically address things, but definitely we ramped up on our customer service and pulled back some of the restrictions. For example, if somebody's late on their bill, the affordability issues, tried to make things more easy to install. We gave educators and others discounts. We bumped up the speeds. So there's a number of things we did to try to make sure that the service they were getting was going to be sufficient to needs that they didn't have a month earlier. And a lot of those practices became permanent. I think you'll ask most providers that a lot of the things they've done have worked well. They've been good for the community. It didn't hit us financially as hard as we thought it might. And it's been good policy. We try to take care of those around us. I guess the other challenge is just keeping up with our technology. As the usage went up, we were pouring a lot of resources and a lot of money into upgrading things that we thought we had another year or two before we were going to need to upgrade them. So doing those all simultaneous with people getting sick with COVID, not being able to work for 2 weeks, it was a challenge. It was a year I don't want to go through again, but we learned a lot, we became a lot more efficient, and I think we're ready now to face bigger challenges because of it.
It sounds somewhat optimistic from lessons learned over the last year, and some positive changes to the marketplace that you and other providers have likely had to adapt to. And combined with the Utah Broadband Center, it sounds like there's some great synergies that as we come out of this commercial break, we'll go into with a little bit more detail. So stay tuned, you're watching The County Seat. Welcome back to The County Seat. Thanks for joining us. Again, we have today's special guests, Rebecca Dilg and Randy Cosby. And we've been exploring rural broadband access and some of the challenges and opportunities as a result. The American Recovery Programs Act, or ARPA, it gives some grant monies through the Utah Broadband Center to enable providers greater access, yes? Mm-hmm. Has Infowest had the kind of experience with government grants to provide greater access to these remote areas where it's got to be terribly expensive? You kind of mentioned this during the first segment, yeah?
I guess maybe illustrating why that's expensive. It's a lot cheaper to build access in the middle of 10,000 homes than building access clear out to where there's 50 homes and be able to serve each of those customers and make a profit on that and be able to make a business that actually works. So we've been working on doing that. I have not been using government funds. That is something I'll be looking at for the future because I think that's just the way things are accelerating. We need that little boost, and this office helps coordinate that and helps us to do that. But I think as a small business that's been in operation in Utah, and there's a number of them like me, we've been working hard without these kinds of funds in the past, and we figured out the best ways to make things happen. I just watched a presentation with a big Fortune 500 company that went into an area and spent $5 million to hit 2,000 families with low-income internet access. I've just completed a similar program for about a fifth the cost that I subsidized myself that I was able to make sense of. And I think there's other ISPs like us that can coordinate and can use these kinds of funds really wisely and really efficiently in Utah to make some really great things happen. People need broadband now. It's not a nice thing to have so you can play the games. I'd say more than half of my customer base is working from home or has been working from home in the last year and a half. Almost all the kids are educating from home. So those things aren't options. They're necessities if we're going to have prosperous communities.
But seeing the return on investment or ROI so challenging in rural areas where the density is low, which is a low customer count, but it can also mean, I think you mentioned this or alluded to it earlier in the first segment, the distance between homes is very different in some of those situations. So how does the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity and the Utah Broadband Center help providers satisfy what consumers need?
Okay, so our grants are incentives. So sometimes we need to provide a little reason why, an incentive to be able to encourage a business. And this grant is not a typical of the other economic development grants in that we're trying to bring necessarily company to the area or something like that. We have the companies here. This is consumer, serving the consumer. It's helping those households, as Randy said, that are trying to educate for telehealth reasons, for employment reasons. It's incentivizing the providers to give them a reason and an ability to be able to bring broadband to the home.
So how does this fit in with the Rural Online Initiative and the mission that this seems to dovetail well into?
Well, it really does. I mean, we learned the term last year, Zoom towns. So that gave people an opportunity to move to the rural areas or to stay in the rural areas and be able to conduct business, as usual. The Rural Online Initiative is training people to work remotely. We have a grant through the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity that gives money to businesses if they will hire somebody that's working remote. It's been interesting to have companies even outside of the state who have contacted us and say, hey, I'm looking at hiring people in rural Utah. High paying jobs, they're able to stay in Utah even though the employer may or may not be in Utah. So in the rural areas, we have talked a little bit about the difference of the economy, and the numbers for in the rural areas is higher that do not have broadband access. And some of the more severe counties would be like San Juan. So we've got the tribe down there, and we know that they were impacted quite a bit this last year. So their numbers are up to, nearly 47% that did not have the connectivity. So major steps were made this last year through the providers and through the funding that came through to get it to these areas where we're talking households that not only don't have broadband, they don't have water or electricity. And now those things are happening.
Isn't it interesting, and possibly some silver lining, that out of the terrible situation from different perspectives you might have about last year in 2020, there are some really great, advantages that are coming out as a result of that, and notwithstanding the federal programs that are affording these, right? So Randy, what have been some of the surprising or interesting stories that Infowest has seen this last year in deployment in some of these rural areas for broadband?
It's who we're deploying to. We're having CEOs from companies in California that are moving out to the middle of places like Beaver and Enoch and expecting to have the type of service they have in California right there. And it's really caused us to really look at how we can do that economically, because there is a market. There is a market now. But also there is a need. How many people that qualify for some of these low-income programs are now available for broadband has been a bit of an eye-opener as well. There is a economic disparity that I think is making the broadband need even greater, so these people can work jobs that are not your typical tourist industry or low-paying industry and stay in those communities, not send their kids away.
That's a really interesting segment I'd like to explore just a little bit deeper during our final thoughts after this commercial break. So stay with us. You're watching The County Seat, and together with Rebecca and Randy, we'll be back after this commercial break. Well, welcome back to The County Seat. Thanks for joining us after the commercial break. Again, we're with Rebecca Dilg of the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity and the Utah Broadband Center, and Randy Cosby, the COO of Infowest. Now, you guys are a local company, yes?
We are.
From the ground up here in Utah.
From the ground up, started at Dixie College back in the day, 27 years ago.
That's fantastic.
And yeah, we've been building since then.
Now, you commented before the commercial break that you've had an interesting example of the wide range of clients that have come forth in this last year, and the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity and the Utah Broadband Center specifically being tasked with at one end of that spectrum, getting new infrastructure out to areas that were previously not served or underserved. And you had talked about a CEO from a large corporation out of California. That's quite a swing of new clientele and a new perspective to have, yes?
Definitely.
And is that something you've observed, Rebecca, throughout the state this last year?
That's a good question. We know that there has been a lot of movement and a lot of people coming to the area, but also to serve the people that are just right here, just like Randy and his family that are here. You know, they've got a business model and they've done very well, but even with that business model, they care about the community. You know, they're right here, and they have found ways, as he said, to serve the community and to help build this out. But that's not the case in every location. So we have some areas where people live and just can't afford it, and so the only way to be able to do this is to help them out. Now, we do have a grant program. There's also the Universal Service Fund. That's been an ongoing program for the rural areas.
What is that?
So this is something that we all have helped pay into through your landlines. We pay a fee to kind of make it universal, so that we might be paying a little bit more on the Wasatch Front for our phone service to be able to make it affordable in the rural areas. Why do we need that? Well, we do commerce. Wasatch Front does commerce with ranchers down in, rural Utah. They're selling to the restaurants here, they're selling to the consumers here. It's back and forth. Why wouldn't we want to have a universal service across the state? Because we rely on each other for commerce.
It seems like a great, use of a dad joke there, that we're all interconnected, right? From broadband to literally commerce as well as education, right? And that's fantastic, and great to have a local homegrown business that's familiar with not only the terrain that we spend a lot of the program discussing, but also the people and the different needs that they have. So Rebecca, if I understand correctly, you have grant programs for service providers.
The grant program for the broadband will be a community effort, so it'll be like a public-private partnership. So we're going to have communities and providers that are engaged with those communities to find out what their greatest needs are, how they can help impact the community. And so they will be reaching out, they will do surveys, they will talk to the elected officials there and find out where the areas are. Are there schools? Are there libraries? Are there city or local offices? How they can best help serve.
Oh, that's fantastic. So as we wind up today's program, Randy, any final thoughts?
Well, I talked a little bit about my company, but there are a number of companies like ours that are out there. And I can't compare to other states. I don't do much business out of state. There are some really good things going on in Utah, not just the grant programs, but there's some good cooperative models. For example, UDOT shares their conduit along the freeways with other providers, so they can put fiber in there. They trade. If a provider builds fiber along a road, they can give some of that to UDOT in exchange for mileage in another place. Those types of programs that enable, and like you said incentivize providers to get out to these places where it might not make financial sense right away, are huge. And I think as communities, as counties look at not just the grant money that they're going to be having, which is crucial, but going down the road 10, 20 years, what kind of policies they have in place that are cooperative, that are incentivizing, that are win-wins. Those are the things that are going to have the biggest impact in the long term. We started our company 27 years ago, and as our partners have been talking, a lot of us are still there. We compare it to back when the farmers were building canals. They didn't build canals for themselves and their farms. They build them for the people that are going to be there 25, 50 years down the road. And I think those kinds of things, with these cooperative arrangements, with not building up monopolies, but building up cooperative things with private and public, you're going to have some really good results in the future, and Utah will continue to be a state that people are going to be looking at as a model on how to do this right.
Well, that's a great final thought. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time today, Rebecca and Randy. We learned a lot about broadband issues in Utah generally and the rural areas specifically. And thank you for joining us today. Remember to follow us on our social platforms, and remember that the government closest to you is the most responsive. And until next week, you've been watching The County Seat. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you for watching The County Seat. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications to keep up to date on the program and happenings around Utah.